and Ebony, you should be able to go ahead. You guys should be able to start your event here. So please go ahead. I'm just going to put myself on mute and you guys go ahead and get started with our guest here.
Well, hello and welcome everybody. For starters, my name's Ebony and nice to meet you. And this is my co-host, Bill.
My name is Bill Edgett and I am from New Brunswick, Canada. And we are very happy to have Dr. Donald Dutton with us today. Ebony, if you'd like to proceed.
Well, I mean, we're very honored to have you and everyone who has signed up here today. We hope to learn quite a lot. In fact, I'm sure most of the people who are here are already familiar with you and your work, but we're interested, in your new book here. And we're hoping that you can tell us a lot more about domestic violence for those of us who are wondering, where we are in terms of a society, recognizing just how serious it is. We've got a number of questions for you. Were you thinking, Bill, that we would go one and each back and forth?
Sure, I can start if you'd like.
I think that'd be nice.
Yes, Dr. Dutton, again, thank you for joining us. And it seems we have a lot of guests on, and I'm happy to see some people joining in to take part. I was just wondering, what is your background in domestic violence research? And how did you get involved in this field? And just maybe tell people a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. I'm a BA, MA, PhD from the University of Toronto. In 1969, I took a job at University of British Columbia and in the Department of Psychology. And I was being a sort of general academic, doing social psychological research, but a little sort of dissatisfied with that because I wanted to do something that was a little more applied. I got lucky in 1974. My former criminology professor from U of T, John Hogarth, came to UBC to join the faculty of law, and his job was to update police training, sort of drag it into the 20th century. And so I had a sabbatical coming up, and he asked me if I would be interested in taking a look at police training and from a psychological perspective and what parts of the job were sort of lacking, which I did. And the one thing I heard police complain about all the time was having to answer what they called domestic disputes. They hated doing it. They felt it should be social workers' job, not their job. And they didn't feel properly trained to do it. So what I did was to develop a police training procedure for handling domestic disturbances that focused, first of all, on police safety and also on analyzing the cause of the domestic dispute that they were attending in such a way that it could be referred out to proper social services. And the notion was not on arrest, it was on referral. And so they loved this, except that they didn't have anybody to teach the police how to do it. So I wound up taking a second job, which was teaching police how to handle domestic disturbance calls, which I did for years. And it became evident that it was pointless to teach the police how to handle a domestic disturbance call if there really was nowhere to go with it. Some of the social services felt okay in handling it, but there were also cases that clearly called for an arrest, that technically an assault had occurred, there was evidence for the assault, etc. So I then began to approach one of the family court judges in Vancouver, along with Dale Trimble, a local therapist that we shared a sort of background training in doing our in-group therapy that we'd both gone to the same place, Cold Mountain Institute. And we approached the judge and said, maybe you should have, as a sentencing option, treatment groups for wife assaulters. The focus at this point was completely on wife assault. Okay, husband assault was not something that was even considered. And so the judge went along with it. We set up the training group or the treatment group. And so then throughout the 80s, I ran with Dale the treatment groups, did it for 12 years. And in the course of doing it, the part of me that was a research psychologist got sort of quickly dissatisfied with the explanations as to why these guys were the way they were. And I began to look at things that hadn't been touched, like attachment theory, personality disorder, other types of explanation that seemed to fit the data set a lot better. And wound up getting the men in the group to participate as research participants as well, and then wound up publishing a series of papers based on this group and appropriate control groups, et cetera. And then these papers became pretty high profile, and I was asked to speak really all over the place: the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the US Army, the British Psychological Association, the Sorbonne, the University of Washington Law School, et cetera, et cetera. Recognized
Don,
worldwide,
that
everywhere
kind of
except
segues into our
Canada.
next question. Can we segue into our next question? Because what he's talking about right now goes to our next question.
Oh, it is a beautiful segue, but let him finish the sentence.
Sorry, what's the question?
Okay, well, we were asking what exactly is a definition of intimate partner violence?
Well, intimate partner violence is a physical assault that occurs between two people in an intimate relationship. They can be married or they could be living together. They could just need to be emotionally connected. There was a sort of famous case of an intimate partner homicide in London, Ontario, about 15 years ago, where the police chief was killed by a woman with whom he was having an affair. That's intimate partner violence, although it wasn't counted that way because he was married and living under the roof with his wife. But nevertheless, it was an intimate relationship, and that was the psychological basis for the violence.
Right. So that could be even someone else in your family, like just cohabitating.
Well, family violence, you know, everybody who's living under the same roof counts as domestic violence. Intimate partner violence, one of the differences is you don't necessarily have to be living under the same roof, but you have to have an intimate, established sexual or love relationship of some sort. There has to be that kind of emotional connection between the two, even though you're not living under the same roof. But I mean, there's obviously a lot of overlap. Most domestic violence is also intimate partner violence. Or actually, I should rephrase that. Most domestic violence is actually child abuse. Intimate partner violence is less frequent.
Okay.
Child abuse, rather obtuse. That leads us, I guess, to our third question. So I'll hand it back to Bill.
Yes, that's great leading into this. What is the difference between ideological based research and how does this differ from evidence-based research, which is, I believe, right along the lines of what you were talking about, explaining?
Well, you know, ideological research is research that really sets out to prove a political point. In domestic violence, the prevailing point of view from the 70s onward has been a feminist view that all domestic violence is male perpetrated against hapless females, and the only time females are ever violent is in self-defense. And to prove that, the government of Canada funds studies on women as victims and men as perpetrators, period. But never men as victims, women as perpetrators. That doesn't get funded. So because that would run against the ideological view. The problem with this ideological view is the research data don't support it. For example, in the US, they've done 5 huge sample surveys of domestic violence perpetration, where they ask an important question that's never been asked in Canada. They've asked victims of domestic violence if they were also a perpetrator. Seems straightforward, right?
Yes.
Never been asked in Canada. Ruled out. This is what ideological research looks like. It's the questions you don't ask. So you don't ask women about their violence. Anyway, the 5 surveys done in the US, which have a total sample size of over 25,000, they're all representative sample surveys, found that 50% of all domestic violence was bilateral, matched for level of severity. That is, the man and the woman were using equally violent actions, pushing, shoving, or, you know, there's a whole sort of series of steps. There's something called a conflict tactics scale that's used to measure these things, asking people, how do you resolve conflict in your family? And then giving them a whole series of outcomes. And they say, yeah, we did that. Yeah, we did that. When you do it that way, by the way, you get 16 times as much domestic violence getting reported. as when you ask them about a crime, crime victim survey, because still in a lot of people's minds, domestic violence doesn't necessarily involve the criminal justice system. So you get rates of reporting that are way higher with a conflict tactics survey. Anyway, they found that 50% was bilateral, and of the remaining 50%, 35%, the female was the main perpetrator. She was more severe, etc. Only 15% was male perpetrated, and that is only 15% would actually.
Okay, Dr. Dutton, can I hold you for a second? Somebody has their mic open and there
Yes,
we go.
Mr. Dan Mason, could you mute yourself, please?
Okay, sorry for that.
Still on, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we apologize for the interruption. But I was just wondering, is that kind of like indicative of us as a society and like how we deal with toxic masculinity? Like, it seems like perhaps up until more recently, men were not reporting or, perhaps afraid to report or ashamed to report. Do you have anything to say on that?
Toxic masculinity. Funny we never hear the term toxic femininity. How about toxic femininity?
That's
if we had total equality, then we'd hear about both, wouldn't we?
Indeed.
Yeah,
And
misandry is the only acceptable stereotype that still is pretty prevalent in Canadian society. It's fine to be misandric. The only person who writes about it, interestingly enough, is a gay man who lives in Montreal, Paul Nathanson, written brilliant works on misandry. Anyway, sorry, now let me sort of back up a little bit. Tell me the question one more time and I'll take another run at it. I got off on another focus there.
That's good. It's all right. We got time for tangents. I think you asked about the ideological based research versus evidence-based.
Okay, so well, the evidence-based, simply, I'm just saying, these 5 surveys done in the US asked both males and females about perpetration and victimization. In Canada, we do a StatsCan survey every 5 years. They only ask about victimization. They will not ask victims if they perpetrate, because that would be politically incorrect. And if there's one thing we are not in Canada, it's politically incorrect. Unfortunately, that gets in the way of science big time.
Yes.
So nevertheless, even asking about victimization from 2004 onward, StatsCan surveys, which are crime-based surveys, so they have a flattened result, still show males reporting victimization more than females. And Sarah Desmarais, who got her PhD out here at Simon Fraser, is in the US now, did a survey, a meta-analytic survey, 249 studies that looked at gender and perpetration of domestic violence. 249 studies. 13% of women reported victimization in the past year. 18% of men reported victimization by their partner in the past year. 249 studies. I mean, it's pretty self-evident that that's the issue. Now, a lot of people ask, well, aren't women the ones who are injured more? Yes, they are, but it's not black and white. It's in fact, there's a sixth of a standard deviation difference in female reports of injury and male reports. And studies of negative psychological consequences of domestic violence that Ann Coker has done show that they're the same for males and females. Now, just today in the Vancouver Sun, I opened up an article about domestic violence and concussions. And the entire article was just about female victims. It's still the prevailing mode of thought in Canada. I have to tell you, we're an outlier. We're just sort of stuck in the last century or something. It's unbelievable.
Excellent. Well, that's a beautiful segue into question number 4 we had here. And about the stats on the website, they seem to be skewed and they don't show the gender parity that we see in the non-ideological based research. Do you think that there's a filter on that?
Well, there's a crime filter, first of all. That just suppresses everybody reporting. But men slightly more than women, because only 6% of men in Canada would call the police if they were assaulted. I mean, I wrote an article for the National Post about 15 years ago, a case study of a guy out here, a native man actually, who was stabbed by his wife and had the knife still sticking in his belly when the police, he called the police, the RCMP showed up and arrested him with the knife still sticking in him. Now, I couldn't believe it at first. I had to go and check the hospital records, etc. But there are reasons why men don't call the police in Canada. That because the police have been trained to just arrest men for domestic violence. They've been trained to the whole sort of one-sided feminist view that it's all male perpetrated violence, and that's what they go with. I mean, they know better, but they have to go by the rules that are laid down for them, and that's the rule. They arrest the man. It's pretty rare to get a woman arrested for domestic violence in Canada.
This is true. They often just they arrest what they believe to be the aggressor. And
That's
it seems
right.
to be stereotypical that we believe men are to be the aggressor and women are to be
That's
the,
right.
the
Now,
fr-
like,
you know.
I'd just like to add one thing on that. I mean, there was a really interesting study done in Oregon, which is actually a dual arrest state, which means if police get a call to a domestic disturbance call in Oregon, they can arrest both the male and the female. And it turns out that there were a group of researchers in Oregon doing something called the Oregon Youth Survey, which was sort of studying all of the sort of alcohol problems, drug problems, domestic violence problems, in a longitudinal study that went for years. So they were going back to this group of people year after year after year. So they had really good measures of how much violence was going on with these young couples that were between ages of 18 and 28. And it turned out that a subset of these couples had a domestic violence incident that got more severe than usual. So the police were called in Oregon, and 81% of the time the man was arrested in a dual arrest state, even though when you go and look at the reports of violence in these couples, it was equal. I mean, they were both equally violent for the year and a half preceding the police intervention. So this gave you a really sort of clear view of the difference between police arrest data and what actually goes on. And when newspaper people or politicians in Canada cite domestic violence policy, they always rely on police arrest data because they've trained the cops to fit the system. And it's just a serpent swallowing its own tail.
Yes, I agree. It's a vicious cycle where they have created this problem by not properly handling or dealing with these situations.
Yeah.
Our next question we had there was about Erin Pizzey, the woman who started the first women's shelter in the UK in the
Marvelous woman.
early 70s.
Amazing woman.
She claims that domestic violence is intergenerational and not gendered. And what are your opinions on that?
Oh, she's right. I mean, she's right. And she was one of the first people to focus on the interactive aspect of domestic violence, which earned her a ticket to nowhere from the feminist movement. They just threw her out. I remember being at the Family Violence Conference in New Hampshire back in the 80s, and Erin Pizzey was there with her book. And I mean, she was persona non grata. She's a really brilliant woman. And yes, there's no question. Empirical studies show that there are generational aspects to domestic violence. I mean, there's a learned aspect to it. And if people grow up in an abusive house, they not only learn certain behaviors that are abusive, but emotionally, they're really not in the same kind of shape as someone that grows up in a more secure, more solid household. They have trouble with emotion regulation. Because they, at the point where all the neural mechanisms were maturing that take care of these things, they were in a household in turmoil. So the maturation process for these systems wasn't happening properly. And that's a major contributor, because we know now that domestic violence cuts across generations and has to do with issues having to do with attachment and insecure attachment, and in the extreme cases, something called borderline personality. The data is pretty clear on that. But again, those are data that are shunned aside because of the political view.
I think that's great. Now, Ebony, I think this will lead you right into our next question there.
Yes, I was muted. I apologize. I was drinking, breathing into my mic But yeah, that's an excellent point. Intergenerational trauma is something that I guess we're only really learning more about now as we're considering the fact that we can do better. You know, a lot of us were raised, you know, by the hand, you know, a lot of us were disciplined, and a lot of us are like, well, we turned out okay. And then, you know, gentle parenting is a new thing, and there's a lot of people who are for it, a lot of people who think it's garbage. But there's one thing that we can agree on, and that is we were traumatized, whether we want to believe it or not. There are better ways to communicate other than raising fists, and we should do better when it comes to teaching the next generation, breaking those cycles, etc. So how do you think that more people could be helped if we no longer think of domestic violence as gendered?
Well, there's two sort of obvious ways. One is, first of all, you'd have half of the victims in Canada finally coming forward and saying, I need help too, and getting it, which they don't right now, that half being, of course, the male half. The other part of it is if you arrest a man for domestic violence, and he comes into a treatment group and he says, well, yeah, I probably got a problem, but you know, my wife does too. The prevailing mode of treatment is something called the Duluth model, which says, well, you just tell him that he's minimizing and not taking responsibility for his violence. Fact of the matter is he's probably telling the truth. And in fact, there is a case for doing couples work for domestic violence. If you send a man, if you treat him for domestic violence and he goes back to a woman who's also domestically violent, then chances are the violence will recur, and it's got nothing to do with him. And he's trying to sort of handle things better, but he's in an adverse situation with his wife. So she needs work too. And that would improve treatment outcomes, which are, by the way, using this so-called Duluth model, which originated in Canada, despite it being Duluth, Minnesota being the title, because the woman who wrote it was at Ontario Institute for Studies in Education and had no experience as a group therapist, none whatsoever. And she wrote this training manual, which is right out of feminist thought about domestic violence, which is that it's not psychological, has no psychological causes. It's all male perpetrated, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the one that was legislated in the US as mandatory, because I know this because I got flown all over the US to try and talk sense into local people. I got flown in by the local treatment people saying, please reason with them. It never worked. Reasoning with a politician never works. So I just have given up. That's why I happily retired. But you guys are still doing something, and that's good. And I mean, there's a big connection here to parenting, because for one reason being that domestic violence became a sort of legal ploy in court. If you could come up with a domestic violence charge against a man, then you could show that he was probably an unfit father. Well, actually, this surprises a lot of people, but there isn't that much of a connection between wife abuse and child abuse. It's like 10%. It's a rather low connection. It's a different kind of psychological profile for child abusers. But there were a couple of books written in those days, one called The Batterer as Parent, and one that Peter Jaffe wrote, which was just as bad, that basically told custody evaluators to just focus on the man as having some potential for child abuse. In fact, the broader data from the US federal agency that was investigating this says that mothers are 60% of the time involved in physical abuse of children and or child homicide, and the fathers are involved 40% of the time. So the mother's actually a higher risk. I mean, yeah, she's maybe got more contact. I don't know. It depends on the arrangements around the house, but it makes no sense at all to just evaluate one partner for abuse potential.
Okay, I'd like to ask you, go back to you were talking about therapy. Say like the father was sent to go seek therapy, and the wife who might not have gotten therapy, and that would not do anything to change the situation. What would work for this type of situation where one party is getting therapy and the other's not? And would a couples therapy work, or would that not work in this case?
No, couples therapy would be called for. And in fact, Sandra Stith, there's a few people in the U.S. doing couples therapy work, and it's a better outcome. It's a better result. And it obviously makes no sense that you've got two people who've got anger problems and abuse problems in an intimate relationship. You just treat one of them, send them back in the same situation. Obviously, it's going to backfire.
I agree. So that was my question. I think we have covered our questions, and now I guess we'll take the opportunity to anyone else that would have any questions would like to ask of Dr. Dutton.
We do have some questions in the chat. Let's see. Can you still see me, hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I'm looking at the chat here. We've got Jean-Jacques was asking for the title of that book, the Duluth.
Oh, the title of the title of the book. I'd have to look it up. I've repressed it.
It looks like Mark Kleiner suggested it might be Education Groups for Men Who Batter by Pence Paymar.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Circa 1983.
Yeah,
All right.
Ellen Pence was doing graduate work at OISE when she wrote this book and had never done a treatment group in her life. Now, I spent 12 years doing treatment groups with court mandated, men. And it's what she wrote was ridiculous.
Well,
Sorry,
it's nothing new for OISE. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the top
Thanks for
here,
that.
your question, Brian, but Mr. Brian Hart asks, what do you suggest, Mr. Dutton, Donald Dutton, Dr. Dutton, I apologize. What do you suggest the parents do when they're a target of parental alienation, like both on an individual situation and, to influence the Canadian and US policies as a whole?
Man, there's no simple answer to that one. I mean,
Good.
if there were, we'd be doing it by now. I mean, what can you do except, get a lawyer who's good at fighting it and countering the charges? And I mean, it's really complex because you're dealing with a kid who's been brainwashed, right? It's nasty. I mean, I don't have any kind of simple answer for that, except to, fight all the charges, contradict the charges, and still try and keep your head above water. It's a terrible situation.
Don, what we're trying to do at PAC though is trying to help and support as many parents as possible. It's a Canadian group for support in education, and this is part of the education process. So thank you for coming here today and helping us with it. So what you're doing right now is actually helping us work towards a solution for this complex problem. So I just want to say thank you for coming.
All right.
Indeed, greatly appreciated.
Okay.
Stephanie asks, so what can we do to change this approach in Canada? We do understand that's a broad question, but how do we start breaking through this resistance to the evidence?
Well, I guess you've got to work with local politicians. I mean, I don't know. I kind of gave up. I mean, I thought naively when I started doing this that the evidence would win the day. But it doesn't. We're dealing with a cult. We're dealing with a cult. I mean, you have to just admit that Canadian criminal justice policy and domestic violence is driven by a cult that is evidence resistant, that has good jobs as a function of doing things the way they do them, and does not want to change, and will persist in their political views no matter what you say.
I agree with your assessment, Dr. Dutton. The system is partially contributing, if not completely contributing, to the pathology of parental alienation in their process by putting the children as a goal to attain in between the two parents to fight over. They're creating an adversarial situation, and what they're doing is creating an imbalance between the two parties by making a decision in favor of one over the other, which I think just perpetuates the situation.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. It's, maybe from a child protection standpoint, like maybe the only way to move forward with breaking the stigma, because older people may not ever change their minds about how they feel in regards to, this toxic masculinity. But if we teach children, the certain forms of abuse that are even more than just physical abuse, like being used as pawns, or like how to tell when someone doesn't have your best interests at heart, and that it's okay to share your feelings. Perhaps if we educate children at the younger ages, we might have a hope for the future. But I agree, it's very difficult to see like how we could do anything. You know, from this end of it, it's very frustrating. We've got a couple other questions. Dan would like to know, he says, Don, since your attendance at the 2005 International Domestic Violence Conference, do you see any improvement or recognition of the paradigm in Canada that domestic violence is basically mutual? Have the stats in female violence to children changed much? Has there really been much change to the stats at all?
The good thing is that there's groups that are beginning to organize like yours and Cafe. That's the good news. At the political level, no, I don't see any change. I still, the same old show being repeated over and over and over. I mean, I think that, you know, and then the media are really a part of this. I mean, as I said, that article in the Sun today, I mean, I remember about a year ago, the Toronto Star ran a series of articles saying, why is domestic violence policy not working? And I was actually in Mexico at the time, but I was getting it online. So I sent an email to the woman that was writing it saying, the reason it's not working is it's conceptualized completely wrong at the beginning. It's not a gender issue, it's a psychological issue, and you have to make adjustments in the system to take that into account. Well, she didn't buy that at all, and she started citing police statistics that said they arrested more men for domestic violence than women. And what can you say? Of course they do. That doesn't mean that they're committing disproportionate amounts of domestic violence. But I mean, you're still running into that mindset all the time, both with the media and with politicians. Actually, you know, when you get outside of Canada, it gets a lot better. A lot better.
Jean-Jacques Desgrange has raised his hand. I believe he has a question for you, Dr. Dutton.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much a question. It's probably a follow-up question on that particular aspect of the situation within government itself. It's while they kind of, because I have relationships with certain people who are at justice in the family law unit, and it's getting better for men. They keep saying that, but I think there's an underlying, mind you, I don't. If there's one male in that team, I think that's impressive. But the fact is, though, that they keep saying this, but they don't turn the page to look at another way of looking at the situation.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. It's there's an ingrained, and in fact, it's encouraged, especially at this time within the federal government itself, because they're coming out with all these courses, equity, call it whatever, all those things, which are basically, you know, everyone's a victim except a particular group, which I don't need to mention here. And so there's that education aspect that Ebony was speaking of, but it's not towards the kids in this case. It's to anybody who wants to work in a very nice working environment, so to speak, with a good pension and the whole thing. And so people just fall in the line and they do it. So you have a very little, within the political system itself, you have very little, how can I say, opposition. That's it, very little opposition to this whole thing. So that's the comment.
Right.
Thanks for sharing. Do we have any more questions in the chat? Can you see the chat, Bill? Hold on, let's see. Follow the money, Mark says. Yes. Yes, Monique, I believe, is writing that. I'm trying to publish an op-ed on the special interest groups that deny parental alienation. If we can publish in mainstream about the money involved in gendered violence and the Bar Association. Do we want to talk about that briefly? That's an interesting take. And, we don't talk about it much, but I believe, yeah, it's perpetuated. It's not in the best interests of these attorneys to, you know, spread the word that it's non-gendered, or even for us to try and work these things out outside of court, is it?
Yeah, I do want to comment on that, because parental alienation and domestic violence are closely related topics. I mean, that's why we're here. And so they are the main the gendered violence activists are the main deniers of parental alienation, like in the mainstream media, that say it's junk science and it's just an abuser's lobby for abusive fathers. And that's what they've told all our politicians, right? And so but they don't tell you that it's also worth billions of dollars. And I'm wondering, so I wrote this op-ed pointing out these two special interest groups that are very much like tobacco companies, that are making an enormous amount of money. And the majority of us don't actually agree with this, but we're just uninformed. Most people are uninformed. So I've been trying to publish this op-ed pointing out the enormous amount of wealth and money that both gendered violence and gendered violence doesn't like parental alienation because it clearly exposes that abuse is not gendered, and more people are willing to feel some compassion for an abused child, and they can't deny that that woman is bigger and stronger in that case. And women do, when you actually look at the information, like women do commit most of the child murder and child abuse, and I think that's a very compelling argument. But that information, most people are just ignorant of it, like in our mainstream. So and so that's why they deny parental alienation. They don't want to lose their racket. And I've been personally thrown out of a women's shelter, okay, for bringing up Canada stats, and they told me right to my face it was about the money. They're pretty shameless about it, but people just don't know this. And so I've been trying to write about it. I am a writer and trying to publish my op-ed, point out the money, and I'm trying to get a platform. So if anybody knows where I can publish my op-ed, but I've tried every single media outlet, and even the right wing won't publish it because it's too powerful. The Bar Association makes a whole lot of money off high conflict divorce, right? Like this false accusations, the unnecessary custody battles is worth billions and billions of dollars. And then my other opponent would be the gendered violence activists who also make billions of dollars off gendered violence, right? It's the whole institution of feminism. And I mean, the whole women's studies, that's how they justify their racket, right? In our universities, that the reason why it's allowed, this madrasa in our universities, is because of domestic violence, because that's how they prove to the public that they're right about this patriarchal terror, right? So I have these two enormous, we all have these two enormous special interest groups that are making billions of dollars spreading misinformation and have a control over our establishment. So yeah, that's why I started Parental Alienation Canada. I'm trying to organize us because I don't know what else to do. Like if we have a powerful company, a powerful special interest groups like the tobacco companies, there's not much that we can do except do the same thing. And it's not going to happen overnight, that we have to work through these nuances and support each other. And that's how I think it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen overnight, just like with the tobacco companies. Hope that was, sorry, I ramble, but that's what I think.
No, that was good. I want to touch on that point you mentioned there about women, and the stats show that women are more likely to perpetuate violence in the home. And I'm saying, like, in regards to like children, like the child protection aspect of it, when a man abuses a woman, whatever, the police get involved and the woman, cries foul. When, a woman beats a child or there's violence in the home, then there's the fear of the child protection agencies coming in, right? So of course, people are less likely to want to report that, but also people don't believe children nearly as often. Children are quiet, maybe not likely to speak up, less likely to be believed. It's sad. It's sad that children, even when they are abused, and we see this a lot in parental alienation, they will still continue to love and cover for their abuser. So again, you could see that could be a lot of violence in the home that goes undetected and unresolved from that aspect. Also, when a man gets charged, they end up thrown in jail. But if a woman, and rightfully so, has their children removed due to violence in the home, there's still an opportunity for them to, complete their programs, get their children back, and avoid criminal charges. So that could mess with our stats as well. I think that's just worth noting. And hopefully going forward, more people can think critically when it comes to these stats. I'm just looking here at the comments.
Don, could you bring up the Partner Abuse Data Knowledge Project and what that is about? Like people are asking about research, like where they could go for like the non-ideological evidence-based research, and that site is terrific. And they have training videos on there for like social workers and for police officers. And so all the research for this has already been done. We could already be helping people a long time ago, like decades ago. But the reason why it doesn't get implemented and all these people are hurting, like the working class people like us are hurting, is because of the stranglehold of the special interest groups, right? But could you talk a little bit about that? Because I know you've contributed to that site. What is the Partner Abuse Data Knowledge Project, Don?
The Partner Abuse Project is one that John Amell set up. John Amell's a psychologist in California and the editor of a journal called Partner Abuse. And so he set up a project to really look at the state-of-the-art knowledge on a number of major questions having to do with domestic violence. One being this issue of gender causation, whether men do it or women do it more. And so he got specific researchers to do meta-analytic studies. A meta-analytic study takes everything that's already been done and puts them all together and gets a sort of, an average, if you will, without getting at all the statistics. And so Sarah Desmarais did the study on gender, and 249 studies. I mean, everything that had ever been done on gender and incidents of domestic violence perpetration and victimization, and found what I said, that men were more likely to report past year victimization than women were. Women were more likely to report lifetime victimization, but there's some doubt about lifetime memory and how reliable it is, if it's really all that clear when you start getting 10 or 15 years back. But anyway, the past year stuff, which is more reliable, it was 13% victimization reported by women across all these studies and 19% by men. There's also national differences, which have to do. I mean, the interesting statistic is if you measure a woman's socioeconomic power in a given country and look at abuse committed against women and look at abuse committed by women, what you find is that as women's socioeconomic power goes up, abuse committed against women goes down, which is a good thing. But the flip side is abuse committed by women with more power goes up, just like every other study of what people do when they have power. They don't usually act all that well. Anyway, I mean, John Archer, who's a psychologist in Britain, did a cross-national study and really showed clearly that it was not gender, but gender times power that contributed to the main rates of incidents of perpetration.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can see how that could be truthful. I mean, not that how do I put it? It's very oppressive in some of these countries, especially we can see what's going on in Iran right now, and that's absolutely horrible. So you can imagine that violence over there is met with violence that is so immeasurable that nobody tries that again.
Yeah, the worst countries for women were either Middle East or Central America.
Yeah, Central America is pretty bad.
Yeah, Europe, North America, better.
Yeah, because being that we're in North America and we should be better, we really should be better. And the sooner we recognize that it's non-gendered and it affects everybody equally, the sooner we can get the people who need help the help. Let's see, do we have any more questions? I'm just looking at our time here. We have still maybe about 15 minutes if we'd like to field some more questions.
Mark Klein, Mark Klein, he brought up an interesting thing about the Canadian Bar Association's statement in opposition to the rebuttable presumption of equal parenting in the interests of children. He also sent a link in the chat so other people could take a look at this. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the bar is actively lobbying against the recognition of joint shared parenting, 50-50 custody? And do you think the 50-50 custody would be in the best interest of the children and help to resolve some of these issues?
Well, my experience, one of my all-time victories, I have to count them because they're few and far between, was the American Bar Association had a website on domestic violence, which was the standard feminist cant on domestic violence. And they had these 10 myths that they said they were dispelling. And what they offered to dispel the myth in each case was never a well-conducted empirical study. So I went through this thing with a fine-tooth comb and took it apart and published a paper on it showing how it was fallacious from start to finish. And they took it down. So I considered that to be a major victory. I don't imagine the Canadian Bar Association is any better than the American one was then. And so I don't know, I haven't read their website, so I don't know what they say. I mean, by and large, I'm obviously in favor of shared custody. I mean, why do you want to cut a kid off from one of his parents? And even if you made first of all, making the case that it's wife assault, the wife assault has happened. First of all, you're dealing with a biased criminal justice system. So likely what happened, if anything happened at all, was there was mutual assault that went on and the wife assault got measured, got assessed, got a police intervention. Secondly, even if that happened, that doesn't mean that there's going to be child abuse. It's a 10% of cases where there's partner abuse wind up in with child abuse happening as well. So you really have to do a much better assessment than that. And there's a number of pretty good empirical approaches to doing assessment that people have written, and that's the technique you have to follow. You have to go that way.
Yes, I think there's a very good point that in general 50-50 is not fought for, because that would end a lot of people's careers. Like, these divorce lawyers wouldn't have money if we weren't battling. Interesting to note is that I think in Sweden that has automatic default shared parenting, and they have less of a need for lawyers. They make the paperwork so simple that the parents can sit down and work it out at the courthouse.
Oh, no, that's wrong.
What's
Sorry.
wrong?
Let's hear what you have to say, Gary.
That's wrong. I've been a family lawyer for 50 years. It's not that lawyers are making money and that's what they want to do. It's the ideology behind it.
Right.
They're against shared parenting in principle because men can't be parents, period. Don't confuse it. It's got nothing to do with
Well-
money. Lawyers don't need
You're
to
wrong, Carrie.
advocate for
You can
money.
see them in the Erasing Family documentary, blocking shared parentings, and they shamelessly bring up the money every single time. It's the bar association. I'm not
Yes,
saying all
that's-
lawyers are like
That's
you.
not-
I'm not
but
saying
that-
all lawyers are bad, but the bar association as a special interest group definitely has a money involved, and you can see
Of
them
course.
shamelessly bringing it up.
Of course, but that's
More money
not the fundamental
litigation
reason.
and mediation, that's for sure.
Listen, can I ask Don something?
Certainly.
I think I'm gonna, lawyers and fathers who are criminally or civilly in family court, if you have or could produce a short expert opinion report of a few pages that has all those stats in it and make it available publicly to men who represent themselves and to lawyers who represent men, that would be a huge benefit. Now, it may not ultimately work because they may force you to give evidence, which is a money issue, but that would be helpful, I think.
Well, I mean, that's easily done. I mean, in terms of providing a point, a point list that's referenced in research space, that can easily be done.
In a short thing that could just, any man can stand up in court on his own and say, here's Professor Dr. Donald Dutton, this is his stats. And even if it doesn't get in formally, at least the judge hears about it.
Well, Carrie, I spent 25 years as an expert witness, mainly in US courts. And I always preferred doing murder trials to custody cases. Because with murder trials, you got one person already dead. And, it just makes it a lot clearer.
Mr. Lindy, I'd like
Cases were the
to,
worst.
sorry, Dr. Dutton. I'd just like to address Mr. Lindy for a moment. I know a person who was self-represented, and he went about hiring Dr. Stephen Miller prior to his passing and had a 72-page assessment done on his situation, a forensic or clinical assessment of the situation. And his determination was that the children that were being kept from the father by the mother this was a severe case of alienation, and the actions of the mother was creating sociopathic behavior in the children. Now, this father, who was self-represented, paid a lot for this report and had been going over his case for years and provided a lot of evidence for Dr. Stephen Miller to review to come up with a 72-page assessment. And when he provided this to the court, the judge decided not to let this report into the court record because it did not coincide with their previous decisions. So,
Yeah.
Sorry, decisis wins again. Yeah.
how is an individual supposed to deal with that type of situation?
Now, look,
You really don't expect me to answer that in 5 seconds or less, do you?
No, not at all.
We'll have some time. We have like 10 minutes or so.
If
Or
I
5
may
days
just,
or less. Yeah.
if I may just speak to very quickly to the question about money for divorce lawyers. You know who they are because they're all very rich, those who actually go for the money. There's many of us family lawyers like Carrie and I who actually like to get paid, of course, but we'll take a lot less than what it's worth. And I think there's the majority of us that way. So I'm a bencher with the Ontario Law Society. There's been a 6-year project putting in paralegals into family law. And all of that is based on an access to justice situation in order to have more access to justice. Now, my view as a bencher, which I brought, is yeah, it's nice to have paralegals there, though I don't think that they're in a position to do the same work as lawyers do in many cases, although there is room for them for in certain areas. But I've been pushing very hard to try to get some legislative change from the Law Society to the government to pushing for 50-50 rebuttable presumption. There's even there at the LSO, there's total opposition. I can't get through to anything for anyone to even listen to it. So just to there's a lot of work to do. Elections are coming up for the benchers in a few months from now. Hopefully I'll be re-elected and keep working at it. And hopefully next year we'll have a new bench who's more open to that, but that's open. There's also the question of who's being nominated by the federal government in the justice postings. Have a look at that. That's probably going to be very eye-opening as well. So it's not a one reason thing. There's a lot of reasons surrounding that gives us the situation, the judicial situation we're in today. As a last comment, and very briefly, I think Carrie's idea of having a quick list for people who are self-reps or even for lawyers like me of his work with respect to domestic violence and other areas that might be good for domestic violence in children. I think it's a great idea, and if that could be made available and easy to get at, I think it'd be that much more to show any judge who's out there, despite the fact that they might put it aside. It's worthwhile to just keep bringing it up all the time. And I run a weekly family law clinic. It's virtual now in Ontario. And I mean, if I can refer someone to a document like that, I mean, I think it would make their day.
Well,
Sorry,
I could easily do something
About
like
that,
that.
you said you ran a workshop. Not like I would just like to hear for a second. Could you advertise that? I would like to come.
I'm sorry?
You said you run a
You put your
workshop. a
contact
weekly
information,
workshop.
yeah.
Give us the name of it for those who are interested in looking it up.
The workshop?
Yes.
I'm talking about the family law clinic. Is that the one?
Yeah.
The
You
family
just.
law information clinic? Yes, it's done through CCMF Toronto, yeah, Cafe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I bring up the resources all the time, yeah. Can we also let
Vancouver.
Paul Nathanson ask his question too? He's brilliant. We should give him a chance to comment here.
Go ahead. He has the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. I tuned in late because there was a power outage in my building. So I missed most of the presentation, but I've been here for the questions. And I must tell you that I'm very depressed because I wrote a paper, which I later published in a book, and that was in the late 1980s. And it was I was responding to 3 people, Susan Pence, Peter Nadig, and there was one other. And it was in a magazine called Victimology. And they were arguing basically for the Duluth model. And I am not a sociologist or a psychologist, so my arguments were mainly picking their arguments apart on the basis of sheer logic. Their arguments were absolutely nonsense. So I published that in a book that came out in, I guess, around 2006. So here we are, 30 years later after that article appeared in the 1980s, and we're still dealing with exactly the same thing. Nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Is there anybody who can give me a little bit of hope that something is changing?
Trying to organize ourselves here.
Don't look at me.
I'll try to address this.
I'd probably say, Paul, that the hope I have is based on hearing a lot more people speak up. they're more vocal about it and they're not as shy to make it, but that's about the extent of it at this point. You know, I mean, politicians are politicians. That's all there is to it. And they're being influenced, but there's a lot more guys who are speaking up as opposed to just taking the punches and rolling. That's the hope I have at this point.
I believe
Well, I
the
think that I'm
government.
not really talking so much about politicians, although God knows we need politicians who speak the truth. But what worries me is that when you get a large segment of any population that is repressed for decades on end, the outcome is not pretty. I mean, you know, this is a dangerous situation.
Okay,
Agreed.
we are getting low on time here, and Mr. Lloyd Robertson has his hand up and would like to ask a question of Dr. Dutton.
Hey,
So
Lloyd.
please, Mr. Robertson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Dutton, I've admired your work, and I've actually started following you in 1989 when you did a paper which you reversed your position on, and I'm not going to get into that, but over the years we've watched a lot of changes, and you've made a good argument, I think, a solid argument on how feminism has skewed science ideologically, but then as Pinker observed back in 2003, a new quasi-religion was forming, and we now call that religion wokeism, and wokeism has antecedents in various camps, one of them being feminism, and the irony is we now see the concept of women being erased. Do you have any comments on that?
I was woke in 1970. I went back to sleep in 1975.
Okay, that's before my time.
Yeah, I mean, I think wokeism has its roots in things that happened in the 70s and 80s, not just feminism, but all over the place. But it's definitely a political view, and I just generically don't trust political views because they cherry pick. And that's all they do is cherry pick. And as opposed to a more scientific model, which is designed not to cherry pick, at least you should get enough arguments that you're incapable of doing that. Wokeism is just the latest flavor of the month political zeitgeist. What can I say?
Yes, but it's more than just a political flavor of the month. It's now taken on the characteristics of a religion, and as both Jean-Jacques and Carrie can testify in their respective professional domains, it's the wokeism attack with religious fervor. Would you not agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I'd agree. I don't see religion as being all that distinct from other cults. It just caught on and lasted a long time.
Yeah.
It's not my view, but anyway.
Amen.
Well,
Okay, well, that's
yes, go
We're
ahead, Ebony.
time now. So we wanted to say again, thank you so much to everyone who attended, and a special thanks to Dr. Dutton for coming out and sharing this time with us. And I'd like to again just remind you all that he has this wonderful book out, and you can order it on Amazon. It's called Rethinking Domestic Violence, and we are all very excited to talk with you today. And we were hoping that perhaps we might be able to talk with you again in the future. It
Sure,
seems that people would be
absolutely.
interested in coming back for a follow-up.
Sure, absolutely, no problem. Just let me know.
Splendid. That would be
Okay.
absolutely lovely.
All right. Bye all.
All right. Thank you very much for your time today on behalf of PAC.
Here.
Thank you, Dr. Dutton. It's been a pleasure.